All right, my name is Erin Colburn. I'm the pre-health advising coordinator for the College of Health Science. Tonight is our application cohort for March. This is probably one of my favorites actually, because I think that this one provides you with a lot of insight and information that you might need. Ideally, I want you to spend the next 3 to 4 minutes pondering the following 2 questions. What do you think that you would need to know to feel confident in being able to ask for letters of recommendation? And what are you most concerned about with letters of recommendation? So I want you to, in your mind, maybe take 2 minutes and let's think about that, what the answers to those 2 questions are. And then maybe what we can do is for about a minute or so, we can talk to each other about what those are so that we can try to answer those today. So I'm going to give you about another minute and 30 seconds to think or write down or jot down kind of some of those. What do you think you need to know? And I'll try and either dispel those myths or whatever it might be. All right. So from the group, share with me, what do you think you need to know? You don't need to know anything before you can confidently ask the questions. I know that I would want to make sure I had a relationship with that person. Megan, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think having a relationship with the person, knowing exactly who you're supposed to be asking, and then maybe like in what format you should ask them.
Okay. Knowing who, knowing if you have a relationship, and then knowing what to ask, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Hang on 1 second. Miss Shannon needs a little bit of help. All right. So the other question that I asked you guys to ponder was, what has you most concerned? And it might be the same answer to those 3 responses, but what do we got? Tell me what you think you're most concerned about when it comes to letters of recommendation.
I guess I'm most concerned is that I only have close relationships with science professors. I don't really have any other professors I formed a relationship with since all my classes have been science for the last 2.5 years.
Okay, that's a valid concern. We can talk a little bit about that. Okay, anybody else?
Just because I'm here post-bac for such a short period of time, it's hard to like connect with professors that, you know, you may have the opportunity to have 3-4 classes with if you're here for a longer period of time. So approaching people.
Okay, I think that's fair. Anybody else? All right. So one of the biggest things that you can do is have a resume. And it's not a hard thing. It's not an enormous amount of endeavor. It doesn't have to be perfect. But a resume is a hugely important component, and I'll explain why in a little bit. But you need a resume. You should have a resume of your educational experience. You should have a resume that goes into details about your activities, all those things. And so when we talked in January and February, we talked about gleaning and getting a list of experiences. And those can often be where your letters of recommendation will come from. And so oftentimes one of my favorite things to do with students is for me to sit with you and say, okay, well, you took class A. Do you know the instructor? What do you mean by no, Erin? Well, did you go to their office hours? Did you see their learning assistant? Did you talk to them? Did you answer questions in class? Did you ask questions in class? All of those things. And so your resume can help you with that, but it will also be beneficial for when you get ready to apply to medical schools, PT schools, you name it, because then that's a way for you to identify your experiences. It's also a way for your letter writers to have a new and unique way of looking at you. Sometimes I find when someone gives me a resume, I'm like, oh, I had no idea that you volunteered for ... And I'm like, oh, that's cool. And so I often, when I write my letters, I try to integrate some of those things into my letters so that it gives them a full picture of how I know that person. Some schools actually require resumes. So like in your secondary applications, that might be an added thing. One of my students didn't want to apply to Columbia because they required a resume in the secondary and he didn't want to do it. So he's like, I'm stuck into the secondary. But you can use it for lots of different things. And so I do think that having a resume can help look at some of those things or start some of those concerns. How will I know who to ask, Erin? Oh gosh, that's schools. So schools are unique in their requirements in regards to academics, but they're also unique in regards to what we call prescription of or subjective of letters. Most schools, depending on the type of program you're applying to, whether it's PT school, OT school, medical school, dental school, PA school, will require somewhere between 3 and 4 letters. Some will go up as high as 6, some 5. It just depends on the program. And so you knowing where you want to apply will help you establish this. What do I mean by prescriptive? Well, prescriptive is, hey, this school requires 4 letters of recommendation. 2 need to come from academics, a professor, a pre-med advisor, something along those lines, and 2 need to come from a non-academic setting, like your volunteer supervisor or a physician that you've observed or worked with or something along those lines. I give the example on the screen. So if you're thinking about PT school, you need 2 letters of recommendation from a PT. Some schools will say 1 letter about science instructor and 1 letter from someone that speaks to your character. And they're usually, if they're prescriptive, they're very clear about that. They're like, these are the things we approve as meeting this expectation. So you want to know if you have a prescriptive list or not. Subjective is, well, gosh, it could be anybody. It's just, I just need 3 or 6 letters, right? So it could be, hey, we just want somebody that can talk to us about your academic ability, maybe commitment to service. I've had students apply to schools where they've never had an academic professor even write them a letter of recommendation. That's not true of everybody, right? And we do know that you apply to multiple schools. And so ultimately your school list, you kind of almost want to do a checkbox. You want to sit down and say, okay, I'm applying to Idaho College of Osteopathic Medicine, and they require 3 letters of recommendation. And they want a letter from a science instructor, and they want a letter from this person and this person. And then you go to your next school. And oh, lo and behold, that school wants a science instructor. Sweet, I only have to get 1. And so you kind of determine what your needs are. For MD and DO, so MD, the letter writer service allows for 10 letters, and you can actually tell it which schools you want it to go to. So you can say, I want this letter to go to these schools, and I want this letter to go to these schools. For osteopathic medicine, it's 5 letters, up to 5 letters, and you can do the same thing. You can kind of cater to schools. So some of our students are like, well, gosh, I have this physician that wanted to write me a letter that actually graduated from that medical school. Well, have them send just to that school, right? Or if you're like, well, they're the only physician I know, it's like, well, then don't have them cater to just that school. Make sure they write a general letter. So, But these are the two types of letter requests that come out. When you get ready to apply in the application process, whether you're applying through PTCAS or OTCAS, PA school, and MD, AMCAS, you'll have types of letters. Boise State University does individual letters. We do not do what's called a committee letter. You might discover as you're looking at some of these medical schools or other schools that they prefer or highly recommend a committee letter. Committee letters are good and bad, I think. I think there's more bad than good that comes from them, and I want to benefit the students. And so we have not done a committee letter for several years. So if in doubt, whenever there's a committee letter expectation, usually they'll say, well, if your school doesn't provide a committee letter, this is what we want instead. In most cases, I can't say this enough, in most cases, it's why it's so important to look at your schools. That committee letter, the substitute for in lieu of that is typically a science instructor or two. And it's typically a letter recommendation from a pre-med advisor or a physician. So it kind of depends on the school. So you really want to know your schools well enough to know what you need to scrape up and get. I say pre-health advisor because it could be pre-PT advisor, it could be pre-med advisor. Those are one and the same. Those are Shannon, those are myself. Those are individuals who we specifically, our job is to support those students. So those are the types of letters. So relationships, that was a discussion. Gosh, how do I know I have a good relationship? Well, I do think that you might be surprised how quickly you can start a relationship. You know, you may feel like you're taking classes right now and the person knows you like for only 8 to 10 weeks. Well, that's still actually a lot if you're making an effort. I think it's about being intentional. And I think it's about being able to say, okay, you know, what could be classified as a really strong relationship is someone who spent more than 6 months with you. But sometimes we're only with someone for 15 to 16 weeks when it comes to instructors that are teaching from a non-science perspective. And so you have to ask yourself, well, did I actually do well? You know, I have instructors who are health science instructors who at the very beginning of class will be open and honest and say, if someone gets an A in my class, I'll write them a letter of recommendation. How strong those letters will truly be is dependent on you. Hey, you know, so what if you struggled in the class? Did you pass and did you really work hard? In other words, did you go to the learning assistant often? Did you seek out tutoring? Did you talk to the instructor? You know, did you email them and show how much you cared about doing well in this class? Did you not pass it and then you took it over and you took it from the same instructor and they saw your improvement, they saw you get it? Office hours are really for you. And I always tell students, you know, even if you don't have a question or a problem with your homework, go in and find out a little bit more about them. Are they doing research? Are they doing something, you know, exciting and new? Is there a way that you get involved and help in class? You know, if it's a course that you enjoy. Did you take more than one class with them? Think about that. Well, gosh, you know, I took Gen Chem Part 1 and I took Gen Chem Part 2 from the same instructor. Well, gosh, that's a good deal. That's a good relationship. You know, a letter of recommendation is meant to speak to multiple attributes. And so it's not one that makes the difference. It's the 3 or the 4 together that makes the difference, right? If someone is saying, gosh, Eric is very diligent and determined and he goes the extra mile and does a lot of effort. I'm really impressed with the ability that he asks really great questions. I think that's important for someone to be a physician. And then someone that's talking about his character talks about how responsible he is. Those are benefits to each other. So, you know, one relationship might not be as strong as the other relationships, but it's the interaction itself. Does that make sense? Questions you have about that? Okay. how to ask. Dun, dun, dun. And yes, you should ask. You know, what's the worst thing that could happen if you ask someone and they say no? Oh, well, they said no. You move on. You shake it off. You go, okay, hey, I asked, at least I tried. If you don't ask, what's the worst thing that could happen? You could have missed an opportunity to get a letter of recommendation. Dang it. Why didn't I ask? Right. And so when I'm looking at students and I'm looking at what their needs are, and they're saying, gosh, I really need a non-science instructor, and I don't know who to ask. I start at the very top of what's most recent. And I say, okay, well, you took this class. It's not science. Did you talk to the professor? Yes. Did you interact with them? Yes. It's a non-science instructor. I want everybody to read that. Don't ask directly via email. Yes, this is the mom voice and I'm yelling at you. Don't say, hey, so-and-so, I would like to know if you write me a letter of recommendation. Don't do it. It's bad. It's very, very bad. Okay. Unless you have already started the conversation. In other words, like they spoke to you a week ago and said, hey, I'd really willing to write you a letter of recommendation. Okay, that's fair. Or you have been asking, you've been speaking to them really regularly. The conversation was brought up, right? You wouldn't ask somebody to marry them via email, would you? And I'm not asking you to marry your letter writers, but I'm just saying you wouldn't do an important ask via email, would you really? I mean, honestly, if you're wanting a relationship with someone, you wouldn't just do that. What you want to do is you can use that email to set something up where that environment is that you can either meet them in person or you can meet them via Zoom. I've had lots of students email me and say, hey, I'd like to talk to you about something. I'm getting ready to apply to dental school. Super, let's set up a time. Or I'll say, come into my drop-ins if it's not something that's like imperative that it's going to take a huge amount of time. And then they ask me then. And then I feel like they took some time out of their schedule to make an effort to have a conversation with me. The instructors and physicians and all those individuals are going to appreciate it much, much more if you make a personal effort to communicate with them. That's something they could write about. I feel like this person communicates really, really well and has great communication skills. I don't feel like email is a very strong way to communicate a big, bad question like that, right? You don't want that. So this is just an example of a way, that you can start it. I would use email only as a last resort, right? And I would make sure that email is thorough. Like, don't just send off an email that says, hey, I need this. And you might laugh a little bit when I'm saying this, but I'm telling you right now, it has happened to me more often than you think. That someone will email me for a pre-med letter and I don't even know who they are. And they're making the request. They're like, I just wanted to know if you'd be willing to write me a letter of recommendation. It's like, I don't know who you are or where you came from. So don't do it. In person is best. And I know it's harder with COVID and with maybe some of the virtual atmospheres, but again, this is another way to communicate. So set up a Zoom meeting with them. Or if you can go to their office during their office hours, that's great. Or a phone request, right? I think this is the most optimal way, okay? And it takes a lot of courage to face someone and ask them this question, right? And you want to make sure you want to thank them. If they're a teacher or an instructor, you want them to know you value their time. And so like, if they look like they're rushing out, say, hey, can we set up some time where I can actually ask you, I have a question I need to ask you. And so it's not on the fly. If they don't want to pursue your current field, then share your future plans. I always tell students, you know, when you're making an ask, say, gosh, you know, I don't know if you're aware, but my current goals are to go to physical therapy school. And I'm in the process of doing an application in the next year or so. And I'd really love it if you'd be willing to write me a strong letter of recommendation. Okay. Have a plan. Come up with a plan. You know who, come up with a good list of people that you're going to ask, right? Have your number one and maybe your number two in mind. And then please be comfortable with the word no. I know it's easy to be like, oh, but don't take it personal. If anything, you are asking someone to write you a letter of recommendation, and you are putting a lot of trust into those letters. And so you really want to make sure that you're aware that when someone says no, it's because they don't believe that they could do a good job. And that's the last thing you want, right? You don't want someone to say yes when, and maybe even be hesitant to say yes and say yes anyway, because they may not write you the strongest letter that they can. And letters can have an effect on your application, right? We used to collect letters for students and then send them off to a tool that was an electronic way for them to get them uploaded for DO schools before the letter writer services were in place. And I remember seeing a letter that I was just so sad about, because the professor had written one paragraph and it was 16-point font. It was like 2 sentences. It was the worst letter I've ever seen. And I was like, this is terrible. This is unfortunate. And so don't be afraid of the no. Be okay with that. But thank them and say, gosh, I'm grateful that you were honest with me. I appreciate that. And then move on to your next person. Okay. And so what if you go through the entire bucket? Come back and we'll look at the next bucket. We'll figure it out, right? If they say yes, say, oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I will do my very best to keep you updated on my timeline and what's expected of me. If you ask before the application services are up and running for the cycle, you'll want to tell them that you'll have some more information for them. And you'll want to ask them what they would like you to provide them to be able to do that. Okay. Some will ask for a personal statement or a resume, and we'll go through some of that in just a second. Does this part make sense? Okay. When should I do this? Well, guess what? There's a reason why I always do this workshop now. Now's the time. So you need to consider when you're applying. So if you're applying this summer, and if you're applying to the medical schools or the dental schools, you're going to want to try and ask sometime between now and May when it opens. Okay. If you are applying to PT school or OT school or something like that, the application doesn't open up until July, but you want to be thoughtful because professors don't always work in the summer. And so if they're going to write you a letter of recommendation during the summer months, you want to make the ask before they go off contract. So that they'll still write it, but that they'll be around. Practitioners are often around, but you want to be mindful of their vacation time. So if you've interacted with them before and you have an idea that they're going to be on vacation, you might want to try and ask them before that. The most of the centralized application services for application will have a letter writer service inside. And so you won't be able to access those letter writer services until they open. And so you could certainly ask ahead, but you also want to be aware that there's some nuances that we'll go over in a few minutes, but you want to just ask them, but tell them that you're going to provide them with more information if they say yes. The other thing to keep in mind is that some of you might be graduating, or you might be finishing up your coursework before you actually apply. And what you want to be mindful of is that, yeah, it's okay to ask them before you're heading out the door, in other words, leaving, but you want to keep those relationships open. So if someone says, yes, I'm happy to do that, you can be like, well, this is my intentions. My timeline is to play here. Would it be okay if I kept an open line of communication with you? And what is the best way to do that? Some of our students will graduate and then they'll just call or, set up Zoom meetings and talk to the professor that they're asking for the letters. Others can choose to do one of the paid services. I don't like these. I would prefer you not to do it because I'm all about the free. You're already spending an enormous amount of money on applications. To be spending it on this as well is kind of a pain in the butt. But there's what's called VE or virtual evaluation, where you can have the person upload to your service, to the virtual evaluation, and then you get to time it when it gets sent out. But it does cost money to do that, for it to be uploaded to the service. And so it's not my first choice for students, but for some who are like, gosh, I'm not going to see this person for a little while, you want to keep that in mind. The other thing to remember is that even if you're a reapplicant, you'll want the letter writer to update their letter. You don't want them to use the same letter they wrote. You want them to grow with you as you grow as a person. So that's another reason why I think it's a con to use virtual evaluation, is because then your letters get old. And so you want to be careful about that as well. What to provide if they say yes? Well, it depends on the letter writer. Some instructors at Boise State University are particular, and some, they leave it to you to provide whatever it needs to be. Again, I'm bringing up resume again, because that is something that I think you should provide. I find resumes to be enormously helpful when I'm writing letters of recommendation for students, because then I can make connections between maybe research that they're doing. I could see a professor being like, oh, they did these research opportunities along with my class. Things that they like to do for fun, you like to do for fun, education, major projects. Sometimes doing a resume teaches you that, oh, I was a teaching assistant for so-and-so, and they're not a science instructor. Maybe that's the way I need to go about it. Or, you know, they know somebody, you know, so you want to think about those things, but you do want to provide them with a resume. It doesn't have to be hugely, enormously difficult. The Career Services Office does a really great job of giving you some pointers just online and virtually, but you can also meet up with them and do a resume before you apply or before you ask. Personal statements. So I also find it very valuable to use a personal statement, but I personally don't feel that it should be a requirement. I think sometimes students get busy with school, they make the ask, and they don't have time to have a full final personal statement, and they don't feel comfortable sharing a draft. Other times they might share something in their personal statement that they're completely comfortable with, because they feel like these individuals are strangers and they aren't going to interact with me very closely right now. And your instructor might interact with you right now, and you may not feel comfortable sharing some of that information that's in there. So I get that, but there are a few instructors on our campus that do ask for a personal statement. And sometimes they give feedback. I would take that feedback with a grain of salt, in the sense that it's good feedback. They're professors, but I would hope that you would confirm or deny with me or Shannon whether that is an accurate piece of feedback. Because I sometimes agree to disagree with some of the professors' points of view. So does that make sense? You'll need to provide them with documents, and every service is different. For AMCAS, you'll open the application and there'll be a component that says letters of evaluation. You'll fill out the individual letter and you'll say who they are, and it will generate a PDF form that I would suggest you send via email, because then that person that gets that's writing your letter can automatically just click on the link that's in the PDF form instead of having to type it out, and they can upload the letter from there. DO, so ACOMAS, ASDAS, PTCAS, OTCAS, all of those CAS systems, they do it by email. So the way it works is you go into the service when it opens and you indicate who your letter writer is and their contact information, including their email, and you answer some questions, and there's like a little comments box that you can add some things, and you can set a due date. We'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But once you hit submit, once you save that information in there, an email is generated and goes directly to that person's email box. And then they are given the ability to be able to upload their letters. You want to also share with them your timeline. So you want to share with them kind of when your plans are to submit what we call the primary application, or that centralized application. Maybe even share with them after you've submitted, when you get verified, so they know that the application is on its way to the school. And you also want to share with them your information about how you're doing with this process. Hey, I got an interview. Thank you so much for your letter of recommendation. Hey, I got accepted. Thank you so much for your letter of recommendation. So you want to share that information with them too. So you want to kind of have a timeline of when you expect to have certain things done and when you're going to do stuff. This is the hardest part. Students automatically think that letters of recommendation have to be in with your primary application because they put them with your primary, right? They don't. Your letters of recommendation for at least AMCAS, they don't have to be in when you submit to get verified. Now, ACOMAS, ASDAS, they may ask you to have at least 2 of your letters of recommendation in before you get verified, but you could submit without them. They automatically get uploaded by the letter writer. So I go out, I click the little link, I upload my letter and I hit upload. You get sent an email that says, hey, Erin Colburn uploaded her letter for you. And the school gets notification that a letter has been uploaded if they have your application. Typically, letters of recommendation need to be in when secondaries are due. So as students start processing secondaries, they should make sure that their letter writers have finalized their letters. Retaining your rights or waiving your rights. This is important because it's your choice. There is no right or wrong decision when it comes to this, except for that there is some factual things to think about. What am I talking about? Well, you're saying I either want my letter to be completely confidential, I don't want to see it, I trust my letter writer to write this letter and I don't want to see it, and I won't have access to it. Or which is when you waive your rights. Retain your rights says, hey, I get to see those letters if I so choose. And while schools won't necessarily not accept you if you retain your rights, what it comes down to is this. If you retain your rights, are you really putting trust into your letter writer? And they will know that you've retained your rights. And so they may question, well, gosh, does this person trust me? They want to see my letter. I may not be as honest about my letter writing, right? The second piece of this is let's think about it. Let's say if there's a tiebreaker issue, you have the same exact GPA, the same exact MCAT score, you have the same exact experiences, you are the same exact candidates, and they go to your letters and they're both glowing, but you retained your rights and the other person waived their rights. That might end up being the tiebreaker. So you don't want any of that, right? You don't want any of that opportunity to do that. So my recommendation is that you waive your rights, that you trust your letter writers, and that you ask the people that you believe will at least speak honestly and will speak positively about you, and allow for that to enhance your application, or at least give somebody another set of eyes on you, or who you speak to, who you are with more words, right? Does that make sense to everybody? Does anybody have any questions about the documents that we're suggesting? So we suggest resume, possibly your personal statement, and any documents you need to give them to successfully allow them to write the letter. You might also tell them an email might be forthcoming. Sometimes it gets put in spam. It's in the directions on the application workshop and on the application. So those are some key factors. Next steps. You'll also want to thank them. I'm a believer in handwritten thank yous. I think that more and more people are accepting email thank yous. And it's not that they won't accept one. I just think that there's something about getting a thank you card. I don't know what it is for me, but if someone took the time and the effort to write me a thank you card and it gets sent in the mail, I hang mine up. If you come into my office at all this semester, you'll see I've got 20 of them already up, that I'm just so proud of our students, and I like it when I see a thank you card, because I'm it's not about me, it's about them. I'm oh, look, I got it from so-and-so. I'm so excited. It gets me happy. Postable.com is cool. Postable.com is a website where you can purchase thank you cards or birthday cards or you name it. But they have so many different fonts that you could pull off what it looks like is it looks like somebody, my favorite is my kids. So for their birthday card, thank you cards that we send out to their family members, we use as though my kid wrote it and it looks like crayon. It really does look like it. It's pretty cool. So you can use postable.com and type up a thank you card, right? And then you can have the font look like it was handwritten. And then you can send it off to the address so it goes to them. It's pretty cool. Email's good. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but you really want to say the words thank you in as many ways that you can. They want to hear about you too. They want to know that you're getting through the process, you know, like when you start to get secondaries and interviews and acceptances, that's another excellent opportunity for you to thank them, but don't wait to thank them just then. Thank them for their efforts, you know, especially if like maybe they're behind the 8 ball a little bit, they're late, they're not writing they haven't written it yet. You can be like, hey, I really appreciate your time. And I just wanted to make sure you knew that I got verified and that my schools have my application. And I'd really love to have your letter in as part of that. And the fact that you thank them also gives you the ability to be able to ask again, right? So if you ask somebody to write you a letter of recommendation and they do, and then for some reason something doesn't go as planned and you don't get accepted, and then you come back to them and you say, hey, I really like a letter of recommendation, and they're like, what happened? Why didn't you get in? You know, and so you want to be able to keep those doors and those relationships open. So we started out the meeting today with some concerns. One was, who do we ask? And I think your schools drive that conversation. And then even in an advising appointment with me or Shannon, that's like, gosh, you know, who do you need? And I would be happy to set up a meeting with somebody and go over not only their personal statement or their writing experiences, but also talk about letters and be like, gosh, I'm really scared about asking for a letter of recommendation. I don't have a non-science letter and I need one. And then we can kind of look and see if we could find out somebody who you may not have thought of. We also talked about, yes, you do need a relationship, but define relationship. You know, sometimes students don't realize that you have a relationship with an instructor, even if it was via Zoom. And you do still have time to get them now. In other words, you can reach out to people and be inquisitive and ask questions and get to know some individuals and kind of go from there. I love students to choose from their classes that they're in right now because it's fresh in the instructor's mind. And then I think the other one was, how do we make that connection? And I think that it's easier to email somebody and say, hey, I'd like to set up some time to talk to you about something important to me, or go to class and ask right after class is over, hey, can we set up some time for me to meet with you, or go during office hours. And, you know, it depends on your comfort. If you're, like I said, if your instructor's running out the door, it's probably not the best time to ask them. But if you make an effort to set away some time with them, then they're going to be more keen to that. They're going to be more ideally excited about that idea. Questions that you have for me?
I have one.
Yeah.
Oh, can you hear? Okay. So for like the AMCAS, what's the earliest then that I can send those requests to like professors and stuff? Like how early can they upload that stuff?
So I don't have the exact date. It'll be the first week of May when it opens and you can go in and place the requests into Bean. It's one of the, I would say it's probably the second or the third thing you'll do with the application when it opens up the first week of May.
Okay.
Is you'll go in, you'll fill out your documentation information about who you are, where you live, and your phone number and email address, and get things started. The second thing you'll do is your colleges. You'll enter your colleges attended and get those forms. And the third would be to put those that you've requested letters of recommendation for in there so that you can generate those PDF forms on AMCAS or send those emails out. So the soonest is May.
Okay.
So secondaries typically start to come out for medical and dental about July. And that's kind of when you want July, August is when you want your letters of recommendation to be done, ideally. But I've seen there's a couple instructors that are a little late on the ball game, that will submit in late August, and still it's good. So they don't have to be in with your primary, but yes, the soonest typically for a ACOMAS and AMCAS is the first week of May. We are hosting an application workshop, and that will be on April 18th. It's a Monday, and instead of doing cohort, I'm going to do that one, and I'm going to do an hour and a half because I'm going to go through the entire application, and I'm pretty confident I will have the dates at that point to give students a little bit more of a heads up. But for sure it's going to be the first week of May. Great question. Anybody else? How many of you know which letters you need? You can just raise your hand or. Okay. Okay. So that would be first step. Step one would be making sure you know exactly what you need. Second step would be, okay, now who are those spots going to fill? Does anybody that has figured those schools out have some concerns about who might fill their letter spots? Okay. What kinds of concerns? Give me some ideas so I can give you guys some direction.
I'm kind of in the same spot that Katie had mentioned, where I haven't taken any non-science classes for a few years, and it just wasn't really on my mind back then. And so it would be, I'm definitely gonna have to meet with some professors and try to like remind them who I am, I think.
Okay. Well, and think about this too. You might interact with someone that is a non-science instructor, but maybe you didn't have them in class, but you interact with them. So non-science is anything that is not math, biology, chemistry, or physics for med. For dental, math actually is not part of that. So if you need a non-science letter, you might think back, what's the most recent interaction I've had with somebody that's a psychology instructor or a health studies instructor or a kinesiology instructor or an engineering instructor or, you know, and it could be like, so I know a lot of you students have participated in the vertical integrated projects. Who's on the team, right? Is there somebody who's an engineer that's on the biology team on the VIP program with you? Well, they're not science instructors. So be thoughtful about that. Be like, gosh, you know, it doesn't have to be somebody that I took a class from. It just needs to be an instructor, a professor that is not a biology professor, a chemistry professor, or a physics professor. And you might steer away from math, but I think you could get a little crazy with it. Math could possibly, and the application for AMCAS says math is a science. The application for DO schools says it's not. So does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
I hope that helps a little bit. You know, sometimes we don't think outside the box, right? Okay, do I know somebody who's an instructor that teaches in those areas? If any of you are in the honors college, any of the honors college classes are non-science. You know, if you're in a living learning community or you know, some of those things. And again, it's not just one letter that's going to make or break you. It's the sum of those letters, right? And so you're trying to tell a story about you with those letters. You can also call the school and be like, what do you define as non-science? Sometimes they'll surprise you. Does that make sense? What else? What other concerns do we have? That darn non-science letter every time. How many of you interacted when you were looking at your schools and saw the committee letter? Didn't know what that was until tonight. Okay. What do you guys think about the waive your rights versus retaining your rights? Do you guys have any questions or concerns about that? When you waive your rights, you can't write your letter for your letter writer. You can't see it. You can't upload it for them. Does that make sense? They have to do that. And I won't lie, I've helped a couple of new professors upload letters. Okay. All right. Well, I hope this was helpful tonight. This is one of the big ones. And then the next one, again, we will have application cohort on April 18th, which is a Monday. And that one is an overhaul of the entire application process for all application services. So if you're wanting to get a, elevated view of what that's going to look like when you open up in May or July or whenever it is you're opening, this is a good one. And it's very thorough, and we do some activities to kind of get you kind of started on some of those things. The other things to keep in mind, tomorrow, Pacific University, which is for PTOT, pharmacy, optometry is coming tomorrow at 2. Western States is chiropractic on Wednesday, and Friday on April 1st is Western University, which has all of them. I mean, there isn't one that there isn't there. So they have a DO school in Pomona, California. They have a vet school, a dental school, and that program we're going to do an hour and a half. And so you'll get to interact with recruiters from all of those programs on that day. So on April 1st. The following week, we do have our MMI. So our mini medical interview, and I will still accept some student observers. If you are interested, it goes from 5:15 to 6:30, or it goes from 6:45 to 8. And the more you watch and learn about how to interview, the better. It can help you with Casper. There's lots of different cool options that we're going to provide. So feel free to email me if you want to do that and you didn't realize that was something that you could do. It's a big event. And then we have several different schools coming throughout the month of April. And then you might want to save the date. We haven't selected which days are what, but typically we host on Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday, the pre-med, dental, and pre-health panels. We usually bring in 4 or 5 students for each of those that were accepted to their programs of choice. And you get to hit them up for question and answer. I intend to have it in person and Zoom both. And I'm very excited about that. So I just wanted to keep, and that is the week of Dead Week. It's the week before finals. So we're going to try and have some fun to rest your brains. So as always, you can set up advising appointments with me. You just might email me because right now we're in the registration season. So I'm using a different You Can Book Me link. So if you want to try and get in for a quick 30-minute appointment, we can certainly do that. All right, I'm going to pause.